Okay then, welcome everybody, and thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us for our live event. My name is Mark Hudson, CEO of Squirrel365, and today I'm joined by my colleague Donald MacCormick, our Chief Strategy Officer, and Jim Peduto, Managing Partner at AICS. We're recording this live event, and this will be available to you all later today. We'll have a Q&A session for Jim at the end of the presentation, so I encourage you to use Q&A and chat panels during the session for any questions you may have for Jim. In fact, why not use the chat session now to say hi and let us know where you're dialing in from. Let's get started. More and more businesses are using value calculators as sales tools to help their prospects and customers understand the return of investment that their product and services will deliver. By collaborating with customers using these tools, sales teams create more successful business cases that give greater visibility and understanding of the benefits of their solutions and result in more and higher value sales. One such example is AICS, who use interactive calculators designed using Squirrel365 to help their customers better position their products and services to the facility management industry. The Squirrel team are delighted that AICS are using calculators built with Squirrel and are excited that they're here today to discuss how they've delivered them. So it's my great pleasure to welcome a customer and friend, Jim Peduto, Managing Partner at AICS. Jim is a highly sought industry expert who specializes in quality assurance, workloading, benchmarking, process improvement, and sustainable cleaning. A regular contributor to leading industry publications, Jim has written over 50 articles covering all aspects of the facility management industry. He is one of the cleaning industry's leading authorities on the use of costing and quality standards to drive service improvements and sustainable services, and he's here to talk to you all today. Donald and Jim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark. And Jim, the first thing to say is thank you for being here to share your story with us, your squirrel story. I've seen what you've done, so I'm as Mark said, we're quite excited for you to share it with the audience. One of the things that people talk a lot about today is the whole idea of digital transformation. And I have to say quite a lot of nonsense is talked about it, but this is a great example of it, taking digital assets and using them to further your business. So it's a great use of our product. But before we get into what you've done with Squirrel, and we'll do a demo of that, I know, later on, perhaps you can give us a little background, a personal background and background to AICS and the market that you guys operate in.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks for everybody being here. Well, first of all, like probably a lot of people on this call, it's kind of been a long route. I'm actually a recovering lawyer. After I practiced law for a few years, I realized there's definitely a better way to make a living. So I joined my family, had a distribution business. I joined that, helped it grow. In 1996, we sold it to a publicly held company, Unisource. And then I thought, I got to do something else. So I started a facility maintenance and management business from scratch. We grew that to about 2,200 people. About 7 years, I sold that to a Canadian company that was looking to have a presence in the United States. And since that time, I've had a consultancy. The consultancy has two parts of it. The first part is AICS, that's focused on the facility maintenance and management industry. The second part of it is KnowledgeWorks, and at KnowledgeWorks, we help CEOs transform their sales organization. So those are the two parts of my business and kind of how we got here.
Excellent, great background. Good. It's always good to know the history and where people have ended up here. So moving on to Squirrel and the stuff that you've been doing. What was the problem that you were looking to solve with Squirrel? And where did you start out with this?
That's a good question. So actually, the primary issue we had, and it could be a lot of other folks here as well, is we had lots and lots and lots of spreadsheets. And, spreadsheets are great, but there's no matter what you do to them, they are still spreadsheets, and they've got a lot of weaknesses. They can, no matter how much you dress up a spreadsheet, no matter how hard you try to format it, when you're done, it still looks like a spreadsheet. And then, I think we struggled with the fact that there's no protection, or not a great protection, for the underlying intellectual property, the formulas and the math and everything that goes behind the assumptions in your spreadsheet. You add that to an ugly interface, and then no matter what you do, there's all these tabs, and you have to train somebody to use it, and they can still break it. And it's clunky, and it's not a tool to help you sell. It's a tool, or help you with any calculations. It's a tool to get, more often than not, gets in the way. So a number of years back, we worked with a company called AICS. They had a great kind of interface, somewhat similar to Squirrel, although it was not nearly as powerful. And if you're not familiar with AICS, it's kind of like a first generation Squirrel product, but it was built on Flash. And now that Flash has been relegated to the dustbin of the software industry, there's no replacement for it. So we had all these AICS Flash-based applications that were wonderful interfaces on top of powerful spreadsheets that we couldn't use anymore. That was the first reason. And the second thing that we had to accomplish to replace it was I needed something that was scalable, because we have a lot of clients, that was easy to use, web-based, and I didn't need to hire, or our team didn't need to hire developers. So that kind of led us to our conversation. That's not mine. Our conversation.
Sorry.
That led to our conversations with Squirrel, and to where we are now with a number of applications, one of which we'll look at today.
Thank you, and apologies. Someone has knocked at our door, and so the dog will bark until they go away. So apologies about that. It's one of the great.
Not law enforcement.
Well, yes. Well, I don't know. It could be, but that's when the door gets broken down. Anyway, no, it's one of the beauties of this whole home working post-pandemic thing is how you get introduced to people's personal lives and their mad dogs. Anyway, so yeah, you had all these spreadsheets, lots of great business logic in them. And as we know, spreadsheets run many businesses, but yeah, obviously you're finding that actually using those as sales tools, letting them outside your organization is fraught with trouble, fraught with difficulty. Certainly when you're trying to sort of put a professional sort of front end on them, sort of to use. And I think that the other point you make is very important, is that spreadsheets get, even sort of quote unquote simple spreadsheets, get very complicated. And trying to get other people to use them. I mean, if you're using a sales tool, then what you want is for people to actually use it. And it's actually quite difficult for people to use it if it's just a spreadsheet and say, hey, as you say, you need training. What you need is what we refer to as a no training required interface, which is great because as we're about to see, that's exactly what Squirrel can do for a spreadsheet. Obviously, sitting on top, we're not an alternative to spreadsheets. We sit on top to produce exactly these interfaces that you're talking about that help people do great things with their existing underlying spreadsheet logic. So, so perhaps we could have a look at. It'd be quite interesting actually to have a look at the original spreadsheet that you were working with for this for the calculator you're going to show us, and then move on to the calculator itself so that we can see the big difference that makes.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that. So just a little context. So the application we're going to look at solves a specific problem that's occurring now everywhere in the facility management world. Post-COVID, or because of COVID, office spaces, factories, school, the usage of the space is different. So for example, actually globally, offices are not at 100% vacancy. So the question the facility management people have is, well, how much staff do I need to be able to maintain the facility in this new environment? What's the right number? That's the problem we had to solve for lots of clients on a pretty broad basis. So we started with a spreadsheet. I'm going to start by sharing the spreadsheet, if that's okay.
Sure.
So the spreadsheet that you're looking at now looks like everybody else's spreadsheet, right? We've got a bunch of inputs. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but what I would like you to do is look at the bottom, and you can see a multitude of tabs, right? So I had to have some basic inputs. Somebody just made a good comment. They said, you say squirrel and the dog barks, so maybe there's a connection. So you look at all these tabs across the bottom, which are just the outputs, right? I've got some basic inputs in terms of how much square feet we have to maintain. And then we've got all these, well, how much for the restrooms, how much for the daily tasks, the carpets, all these tasks. And you can see as I just jump around, there's tab after tab after tab that all need to be summarized. So you can see how no matter what we would do, this could get pretty clunky. And it's, even though that ugliness exists, and it is the backbone, the underpinnings of the model you're looking at now. And one's a spread. What I showed you was a spreadsheet. And look, we could have gussied it up, and I've got versions that are prettier, but none are as good as what you're looking at on the screen, which really looks more like an application than a spreadsheet. And this was done with, this is probably one of the more complicated ones that we've developed. It didn't require any developer input. I mean, this was done in-house, and that's a pretty big deal. So let me just show you kind of what we have. We got a blank screen. One of the things that's neat about this when you look at it, the interface gives you the ability to have some tabs here across the top. So I've got, some basic customer demographic information. Then I've got the main body of the analysis. Then we can add some custom tasks and things that might not have been included, the ability to kind of build it up a little bit. Then we've got some adjustments to the underlying assumptions, a dashboard to summarize it, a number at the end, the cost per square foot, which is kind of the score of what everybody cares about, and then some instructions and an explanation at the end. So you've got the ability to construct it in that way. Also here on the first page, which is kind of neat, we had the ability to be able to save this to a database, an online database. So all the user information that we save is retrievable. So if somebody builds what I think is kind of neat is we can build a model, and we can come back to that model, and I'll show this on the right-hand side. You can come back, and I've just got some demos built in here, but you can come back to the data anytime you want and pull up the information you need. So rather than subject you to watching me input everything, we will just go to the demo. So what do you see? You see some basic customer demographic information, just like you might have for your customers, right? Who they are, what this is, a date, obviously, and whatever else you want. That's great. We've got then the ability to be able to put in some variables, which you're looking at now. I've kind of pre-populated it with some, some wage information and some details about the facility. Which what this demonstrates, which I think is really neat, which is some of the power and the flexibility of Squirrel. We chose to use a lot of the sliders because folks in our testing, folks really liked the interactive ability. And in the environment that we were working in with facility managers that have buildings that are millions of square feet and even some smaller ones, they want to be able to do what if scenarios relatively quickly. So, you look at this, and there's a lot of numbers, and that's what's kind of neat, because this would be multiple tabs in the spreadsheet, and it's not. And what we can do is we can very quickly look at costs, and we can look at costs by category. So you can see my cursor here on kind of the middle of the screen where I'm flipping it around. You can see some of the big cost items to maintain this facility. And, what jumps out at you? Well, $600,000 a year for vacuuming. So what can we do? Well, they're vacuuming it 4 times a day. We can use the slider and begin changing frequencies. And you can go from 4 times a day, and we can see if we cut that, or 4 times a week. If we cut that to twice a week, we could save $300,000. So you've got the ability to be able to kind of do the what ifs, do the math, see a summary over here on the bottom right-hand corner. You can see as I move this slider, how the numbers all change. Slider moves, so it's pretty clean and pretty elegant. And then I can make whatever adjustments. If I have to pay, I don't know where you live, but everywhere I've worked, which is the US and half a dozen other countries, there's labor shortages and pay rates are going up. You can see what happens. I can move pay rates and have an impact on what we're doing. And being able to adjust hours, being able to see labor detail, to be able to see which over here on the right, I can jump from a summary to the detail. It's really a nice way to be able to display your underlying spreadsheet data. We've got the ability to be able to add special, we create the ability to add special tasks, again, using the tab interface, which is kind of neat. And so we can include, the people that clean up during the day, and we've got the window cleaners. And then at the end of it, we can have a dashboard that shows us the annual hours, the annual costs, the number of full-time equivalents. We can see the cost per square foot. All these show different capabilities. We've got a chart here. We've got the ability to print the image, annotate the image. We've got so many capabilities that you simply wouldn't have on a spreadsheet, that if you tried to get a developer to do, you'd be back and forth trying to teach them your business, trying to get them to understand what you have been able to do. And we can go through multiple iterations of this with a client, get it up and running. And then even when it's up and running, when we make changes, if we make a modification, we can push it out. And because it's web-based, they immediately have access to the changes. So, you spend a lot of time in these projects and then you're done and a word spelled wrong, or something's not placed exactly how you want to. The ability to jump around and move is wonderful. And, with the tabs, you can include text. So we've got some basic instructions. We've got a graphical overview of the process. You're only limited here by your creativity and what you want to be able to do. And you can take an application that's as complicated as this. And we do other ones that are simple ROIs that you might, or calculators or estimators. It's fun to work with because it's robust. And I think you can agree, this doesn't look like that ugly spreadsheet you saw at the beginning. And no one would look at this and think that this is really just a spreadsheet on steroids. So that's a quick overview. I know how painful it is to look at demos and have people clicking around. Hopefully we made that okay. Donald, did I miss anything you wanted me to highlight?
No, that's fantastic. I love it for so many reasons. It looks great, and obviously one of the big things about this is making it appealing. People underestimate, if you want somebody to use something, it's just like a website. If you want someone to visit your website, you need to put effort into making it look good and feel appealing, and this does exactly that. Which is great for your sort of the usage you're going to get out in your customers and your customers' customers, as it were. But the interesting thing from my point of view is, as you say, this is all based on that spreadsheet that you had already written. I know it's a really hard question, but in terms of producing this, how much of it, what percentage do you think is that once you've got the spreadsheet? Because if you were talking about developers, if you had to do this with a developer, the first thing would be explaining them in cell by cell detail how that logic works, and they would then have to replicate that in some development environment. So you take a stab at sort of having got the spreadsheet, which is, we know we've all got them and we all sort of use them every day. Once you've got that, what sort of percentage of the project is complete once you've got that, in order to take you to the next level to get something like this on top of it?
If you've got a good spreadsheet, which so many of us do, the project's probably 85-90% complete. So if you have the basic spreadsheet, what do you need to add to it? Well, maybe you need to add a couple of lists that are going to be drop boxes. Maybe you need to add a couple of either or, I need a little list of my tabs here so it knows which tab to pick. So there's a handful of things like that. And the more, obviously, if you have, this is probably as complex as you'd ever want to be. But this kind of works and looks like an application. There's applications that accomplish what this costs that if you bought them in the market would be tens of thousands of dollars. And this is a simple tool that, it gets most clients 90% of the way there, which is good enough for them. So, I'd say the spreadsheet, if it is pretty good, and then it's really, what do you want the interface to look like? I think you need to give a little bit of thought to what the interface looks like and how pretty do you want it to be? How do you make it? We chose to go with multiple tabs to keep a fair amount of white space as opposed to make it look ugly. I think certainly with what I call the Amazon effect or the consumerization of business, people really want clean, nice interfaces. You just can't do that with the spreadsheet. This does. So, you have the spreadsheet, you're largely there. And then it's just, what do you want to do graphically?
And the great thing, as you say, is that what you're adding is also in the spreadsheet. So it's not like you've got a new set of skills to learn. So you say you want a Dropbox. Well, I'm adding that in the spreadsheet. So I'm just typing into a spreadsheet. If you have got something that says, well, if I do this, then do that, it's an if formula in the spreadsheet, again, which everyone is used to. There's nothing else to do. There's no other language to learn. It's just natural, which is, to your point, is why you can do this as a self-contained project, which doesn't have to go through this sort of, go to a developer, get the sort of something that isn't quite right, and go back over that sort of that iterative process, waterfall process. So it leads to a much more agile approach, as you say, not only for doing things internally, but when you're iterating with your customers.
That's a fair point, because one of the things that we liked about it is that it's code free, right? There's no code. If you can use a spreadsheet, you can use this. So even the scroll interface is pick a cell, tell you what do you want the cell to do, click a few boxes to tell you how you want it to display, what do you want it to look like, and you're done. So it isn't, I never needed code. I never needed to get, the people that are programmers, and God bless them, they have more talent than I'll ever have. But, and certainly certain projects you do need to have it. I think these, if you want to have a relatively short delivery time, this is a really good approach. And it leverages we liked it because it leverages the information that our clients had, which are great spreadsheets, but they need to be able to use, ultimately we're sales consultancy, and we want to be able to use them to tell a story. And it's easier to tell a story like this than clicking around from tab to tab in a spreadsheet.
And am I right in thinking that so this is great, and we'll be talking about calculators as articulations of value. So companies using it to say, well, if you do this with our product or our service, you'll make or save this much money. But you're almost going one step further, because some of the ones that you use, I think this one included, you're encapsulating your knowledge and then being able to take that knowledge and package it up like this and then sell it on so that people come to you and they purchase that knowledge through the medium of a calculator like this, which is what I was talking about, digital transformation. This is a way of sort of generating revenue from the knowledge you have. It happens to be knowledge that's embedded in spreadsheets. But is that a fair summary of where you are?
Yeah, it's absolutely. Because look, the fundamental issue that most businesses have is, if you're not the low price producer, right? If you're not the best known company, you've got to sell that, right? If you're not low price, best volume, the highest quality product, then everybody else has to sell value. And so the question is, how do I sell value? I need to be able to demonstrate the value to my client or my customer or my customer's customer, so that they can then make the case that this is a good business decision. Or in this case, how many labor hours do I need to staff a building that used to be at 100% occupancy, that's presently in 30 and might be going to 50, 60, and 70% in steps? What's my formulation? There's, in this building, when we looked at it, to clean it as it's modeled, it's $1 million, 1.7, right over here, $1.7 million a year. And you need to be able to answer the question, well, what should it be at different levels? But you can dial that in. And whether it's as complicated as this or a simple, our product lasts 3 times as long as the other guys and it only costs 20% more. Okay, show me what that looks like. Show me the 5-year ROI and why it's a good business case. That's what ultimately you have to be able to do, every business.
And the other good thing about an interface like this, I guess, for you is that you've got this sort of sometimes simple, sometimes complex business logic in Excel, but it can be distracting or indeed sort of counter to your business for that to be exposed to other people. It's distracting if people are digging into the underlying logic. That's not what they need to know. So it's easier if they can't get hold of that. But also sometimes there's proprietary knowledge in there that you want to package up. And it's not that you don't want people to use it, but you don't want people reverse engineering it and using it outside your business because it's your proprietary sort of intellectual property. And so both of those are because the spreadsheet is still there in the background, it's just not accessible. So you can hide that away and get the ease of use and the IP protection at the same time.
Yeah, and that's true. You get to protect that. And in a selling and in most environments, it isn't the formula that matters, even, and although you want to protect it, it's the result of the formula, right? So when I move the slider on vacuuming from the number of days and I see my cost, vacillating wildly, it tells me it tells me something. And what you want is actionable, useful information, not formulas. I think spreadsheets just tend to bring you into the weeds, and this tends to elevate the business conversation.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great example of exactly what Squirrel is about. So it's working in combination with your spreadsheets to, as you say, elevate. It's a great word. Elevate that business logic into the hands of people who you wouldn't otherwise get it to, because it's just the spreadsheets are not the right medium for doing that. So so that's great. Fantastic demo. Thank you so much for that. Any before we go to Q&A, any sort of closing thoughts about sort of plans you have for the future, things that you might be thinking of doing, ways of sort of stretching this further?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So look, the number of use cases for this are like as numerous as our clients are and their ideas. So what are we thinking about? We're thinking certainly every iteration of an ROI that you can imagine. Usage calculators are really popular. Quick bidding or quick estimating without, many businesses have pretty complex cost estimators, but sometimes you don't need all that overhead to be able to answer a basic question. So kind of a light version of a internal bidding estimating tool is pretty useful, as are some industry specific calculators. So that's what's fun about this. If you have it in a spreadsheet and you want to be able to use it to communicate with a customer, we can help, and this is a great solution. It's fun.
Cool.
It's fun to be able to focus more on the deliverable and the customer experience than programming.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I know I'm biased. I work for and with Squirrel every day, but I just love what you can do. It just takes a spreadsheet and turns it into something. You stay with that spreadsheet world, which I've lived in for 40 years or so, but just allows you to do that much more. I smile most days when I think of, I could do this or I could do that. So I certainly share the feeling of that and what you can do. And I've only ever done it from the inside out, as it were, but you're out in the real world doing sort of real things, and it must be good to use it in that environment as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. I could talk about this all day, but seeing what people like you have done with this and using it in anger, and that is something which is available to Jim's customers on the web. They come in, they see their own scenarios. It is a proper web-based application providing value from Jim's expertise out to his customers. And sort of, I don't know, most people wouldn't believe that it was possible to do that from a spreadsheet, but you've just demonstrated that it is. So thank you so much for taking us through that. And I'll hand back to Mark, who can go through any questions if they've come in on the Q&A panel.
I've got one question here from Harj. Harj has asked if what she was viewing. She says that looks like a web application. Is all that output we've just seen built with Squirrel? Is the question that Harj has asked.
Well, since we did it, I'll take credit for you. It's 100% Squirrel. That's what's kind of neat about this. There are no add-ins, there are no plugins in that regard. It works. This isn't actually the most complicated thing you can do with Squirrel. There are other things that you can do that are much more complicated, and that's kind of neat. So, you can tie into. There's just a lot. I'd let Donald and Mark talk about all that stuff. But no, this is 100% Squirrel. That's
so it's an interesting question, because one of the challenges we have when talking to people about Squirrel is they say, well, which bit's Squirrel? And they say it's all Squirrel. Yeah, but that looks like a web app, and that's exactly what Squirrel does. It takes spreadsheets and turns them into web applications that you can do this sort of thing with. Now, Jim was talking about demos, and today was about his demo and what he's done with it from business value. So we didn't want to produce interfere with that with a demo of Squirrel. But if anybody is interested in Squirrel and how it does this process, come to our website, which is squirrel365.io. There are numerous videos. Actually, there's a great 90-second video that shows you the principles of how you do this. You bring your spreadsheet in, you click on components, you connect to the spreadsheet, and you're essentially done. So it's well worth coming to that. There are a number of other sort of on-demand webinars that show this. So there's a lot of content there that goes sort of into the more technical aspects of how you do this. I say today we're focusing on sort of on Jim's example of what you can do. But yeah, rest assured that entire screen that you saw Jim demonstrating was all done. That is a Squirrel app, and that is the magic of what Squirrel does.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks, guys. I hope that answers your question, Haj. One more question from I think it's Roland has asked what version. Probably one for you actually, Donald. What versions of spreadsheets does Squirrel support?
So Squirrel actually reads in and reads out an XLXS file, which pretty much any version of Excel will produce one of those. You can also export those from Google Sheets. So if you're a Google Sheets user and your spreadsheets are available to, they can be used in Squirrel as well. And one of the great things is I talked about Squirrel being a companion product. So we're not trying to take over from spreadsheets. So you can make changes inside the Squirrel environment to your spreadsheet. That's incredibly important when you're doing the sort of thing that Jim was talking about. Oh, I just need a drop-down list. I need to type in my values. But you can also export that back out to your Excel spreadsheet, so you're not sort of separating two separate worlds with different documents to run up. So pretty much any version of Google Sheets, any version of Excel. One other thing to say, where versions become quite particular, is we also, in a slightly different way, I mean, what Jim could do with this calculator, or perhaps one of his simpler calculators, is take the output and we can actually embed that directly in PowerPoint. So you could make one of these simpler calculators part of a PowerPoint presentation. So in the flow of your presentation there, you can move the sliders, you can drop the drop downs and all that sort of stuff. If you're doing that, then you need to be on the later versions of Microsoft Office and PowerPoint. So there's PowerPoint in the Office 365 or PowerPoint 2021, which is just really going to be released with Windows 11 in a few days' time. But for Excel and the sort of things that Jim's doing outside of PowerPoint, pretty much any version of Excel and Google Sheets into the bargain.
Fantastic. We're just running out a little bit over time, so I'm conscious of that. Thank you so much, Roland. I hope that's answered your question. So look, just leaves me to thank Jim for your time today. It was an excellent demonstration, and as you can see, Herb has said thank you very much for the powerful demonstration. It was always really good to see what our customers are doing and how they're using Squirrel365, and the value that you're seeing from that is fantastic. I always think they make the best demonstrations. Donald, thank you very much for your time. I'd like to thank Mojo for the interruption. Not to be outdone by Alfie, my puppy, who was barking on the awards ceremony when Squirrel365 won the Financial Model Innovation Tool of the Year award. So we're now 2 for 2 on dog interruptions. And thank you all for calling in from around the world today. The recording will be available to you, as it always is, later this evening. And I wish you all a very good rest of the day. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Donald.